Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and it's balance patch time. So this is the much awaited, I suspect, by many winter balance patch that people were kind of expecting, and it has finally landed. I'm recording this as time of recording literally just after the patch has dropped, because I was very busy this weekend, shockingly, with casting the tournament event, so I've not had time to be as in advance as sometimes I am with this. So if this is a little more rough and ready than usual, that'll be why. As usual, find all the links down in the thingamywhat. I'm content creator, general cards enthusiast. You can find me all over the place about the game. My usual declaration in advance, I am part of internal testing, which means that I do have some connection with 1939 and have had some say in at least the discussions over this balance patch, but I'm limited by NDAs as to what I can talk about. So what you're actually going to get is just my effectively assessment takes, just my point of view as a player like you and someone with a design history. I won't be going into too much stuff that I'm not allowed to, but we'll try and go with some detail through what I think is going to be a very interesting balance patch for a lot of people. There are some changes here that people will be expecting, some changes people wouldn't have been expecting, and I think safe to say some changes that some people may find either controversial or not quite what they were hoping / expecting they would be. In any case, let's get into the meat of it, hop across to the actual dev blog, and I will talk you through it. Right, here we are. So this is the October balance patch dev blog. This time I am going to go through, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. In this case, I'm going to go through this statement because I think it will be relevant to where we're going with this. So the statement is, hello friends, we've been seeing some significant changes in the cards meta since the launch of Air Supremacy last month. The German control has become very popular with the addition of the Henschel HS129 and Salamander from Air Supremacy. Japan-France Shuffle, the J word that I'm not using, is very strong after the balance changes in August, and Brewster decks in various forms have had very solid performance. This balance patch aims to hit the peaks of these decks to even them out a bit, giving other strategies more breathing room and open the way for the winter expansion that is just around the corner. People can debate whether these changes are enough or too much. The intention is not to kill off any decks currently popular, simply to bring them down a notch or two in power. With you, our community, constantly coming up with new ideas and fine-tuning older one, it is impossible to say exactly where the meta will land, but we hope it'll be slightly more diverse for the next few weeks until we kick the sandcastle again with the winter expansion. As usual, we'll start by looking at the cards that are seeing a nerf, and then go through the cards being buffed. Right. Okay. So that's the information we get from 1939, and I want to go kind of into a little bit of detail as to what the meaning of that is. And I can speak to some of this, and I'm on safe ground with most of what I'm saying here. I don't think 1939 are going to send the ninjas after me for this. So a lot of what balance comes from is both being aware of the feedback that we see kind of in the community and trying to get that in. So if you've talked to me or you've posted and I've interacted with you, or someone's read your bits and pieces, or another member of IT has found something that the community is particularly passionate about, that will usually get brought across. But also, there are a lot of background metrics on deck performances, win rates, and various other things that are really too tedious to go into. One, I'm not allowed to go into the numbers, but two, it would be, trust me, very tedious if you did. What has been, and I love the openness about it here, clear, is that certain things have just overtuned. That it's not that the decks are not welcome in the meta, they are just overperforming. And in particular, Germany as a main nation has been insanely good. We've definitely seen Germany-US ramp control be kind of huge on ladder in particular. The Japan-France shuffle deck has been performing mathematically better than expected because it got tweaked, and this is just what happens. We have a very small testing group that tests as hard as we can. When we go into a wider meta, sometimes people will find ways to refine it or get more reps in to just make those last couple of card tweaks that take a deck to the next level, and then we start to see the performance notes. And then there's the Brewster's thing, which is kind of much more on the high roll. So, I think it's actually quite good that 1939 have changed the tone, so far at least, of this. That this is a much less jovial and jokey opening. It's quite a clear tone about we're in there, this is what we're seeing, and this is how we're going about it. So, the next question is, how are they going about it? / how are we going about it? Although I will say I have input, no actual say. Final say always goes with the devs. But let's see what the final results of the balance patch were and talk you through each change. So let's roll on down to the first change, and one that I don't think will shock anyone to see as a card that is getting changed, is the Henschel HS129. So, now, Henschel HS129, which came to us with Air Supremacy, is the 5-cost, 2-op cost German fighter. It's a 4/5 and a special, so you can run 2 of them. And it has deployment, fights target enemy unit, and deals double damage against ground targets. We have seen a change. So the card remains largely the same. The body is the same, the op cost is the same, the deployment effect is the same. However, the core card text has gone from deals double damage to ground targets to has +2 attack against ground targets. Right. So, the 1939 summary is the fight part on a big body makes this a very attractive unit for control decks, but what puts it over the top is the immense pressure it can put on the enemy HQ from the air. That's the part we want to reduce, so the new version deals only 6 damage to HQ instead of 8. The Henschel still hits the ground hard, so expect to see it continue to fly high. This is a pretty fair summary of the Henschel issue. This is an important tool for German control decks and a lot of German ally control decks, which you don't necessarily want to see completely not playable. I think there are a couple of things that also need to be made clear here, is that the double damage can be a lot of issues. Firstly, the double damage becomes much huger exponentially anytime you can put a buff on this unit. Secondly, the deployment clear means that double damage could clear something with 8 defense, which is just a little bit too good. Now, importantly, and I think this is a relevant part of it, at least for me, is that this will still deploy and take care of the 6 defense units that tend to be big targets at the moment. Sabe Regiment is one good example of this, although who knows, that might get changed. We'll see later on in the patch. But this is still a lot of damage, but the +2 is not an insignificant change, because 1, 6 versus 8 is more substantial than you'd think. It on average can buy you an extra turn of survival, which is an extra turn to answer this. But also, more importantly, it doesn't have the exponential problem that if you find a way to put, say, a 3-attack buff on this, it would be dealing, the original version would then be dealing 14 damage to HQ, whereas with a fixed buff from its ground attack, that means that buff is much less exponential. It would only be dealing 9, but that's 5 damage difference on just a +3 buff. Just something to be aware of if this ever gets used in kind of big OTK swings or is used in a different way with a buff. There are ways that it can be an issue, but it still remains a really strong unit. I still expect to see this played. I personally think this is a pretty good change. I think it just stops it being utterly silly, whilst still leaving it to be a solid unit. This thing still suffers from the fact that it is 2 op cost, so it's not hyper fast, and you can answer it, and now you've got a lot longer to answer it. Overall, yeah, I'm pretty happy with this as a change, and I hope other people will be too. I think it leaves the Henschel as a good, strong card that will see a lot of play, but stops it being just holistically oppressive in a nation that didn't need a super strong oppressive card. Right, speaking of the nation and its cards, next on the list we have Capitulation. So this is a German elite. This is the 8-cost German elite order that says all enemy units are converted into routed troops. Routed troops, of course, are just 1/1, 1-op cost units. Technically 1 deployment cost if you bounce them back to hand. This has now changed, but the only change is it's just 1 credit more expensive. It now costs 9. Now, a lot of people are going to wonder what on earth the reason for that is, and why would 1 credit matter? And the short answer is just where this falls on tempo. I think what this does is this pushes Capitulation to be just that slight bit less immediate as an answer in every non-ramping German deck. Obviously, ramp is never going to care about particularly credit increases. I've talked about this before. So if you're ramping in some way or credit accelerating in some way, you care about this a lot less. But in the case of a deck that is a more classical central German deck, this becomes less of a just universal include because it's a turn 8 board reset. I think it's a pretty decent choice. The 1939 summary is that Capitulation has unexpectedly led to the capitulation of many since it was introduced back in naval warfare, but now as winter approaches we're seeing sphincters tighten and backbones harden, meaning it's now more difficult to rattle the rabble. End result, Capitulation now costs 9. Honestly, there's no reason to go into this change in detail. I think having a little bit of fun with the text is kind of fine here, because this is a very light touch change to just try and gently decrease, and they talk about this in the opening here, to just gently decrease the sheer versatility and strength of German main control decks. Multiple small changes will be quite impactful when you do that. In this case, I think it's a good change. I think it's probably going to be unexpected to a lot of people, but I think you'll find it might see you see less of this card. It might mean that you just see a lot less, and if you do, it's kind of doing its job, which is to make this just universally not an auto-include. Right, on to another card which I know everybody is going to have been waiting to see some form of change to. This is Seahawk. Now, let's get the hard part out of the way at the top. This is not going to be the change that a lot of people wanted to see. And I kind of agree that it shouldn't be at the moment, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, Seahawk, for those who aren't aware, although I imagine if you're watching this you probably are, but I always try and keep this clear, is a US, a 3-cost, 1-op cost, 1/4 fighter. It's a special, and it has one of the strongest piece of text we've seen in the game for a long time, which is enemy cards deal 1 less damage. The only change to this card is a simple reduction in its defense from 4 to 3. Let's read the summary and then I'll give you my thoughts. Seahawk is the second air supremacy card, seeing a bit of course correction. It's become quite popular as it stifles many aggressive strategies and can make combat calculations quite tricky, while lowering its attitude by reducing its defense by 1, bringing it into the range of a lot more answers. The ability, though, remains the same, so you'll still need to make sure your maths is correct to find a path to deal with it. Sorry, I'm British. I can't help it. Right. Reasons why I'm kind of okay with this as a change. I know a lot of people would like to just see Seahawk killed because they feel like it is stifling, devastating, destructive, completely and utterly removes their decks from ever being playable. Because when it hits the board, if you don't have an answer, it is a massive feels bad. However, Seahawk is not an unremovable card. Even at 1/4, basically every nation had some way of dealing with it, even if it was just bad trading. We'll get back to that in a minute because that's where this change is particularly relevant. Because enemy cards dealing 1 less damage also makes this harder to trade, a reduction to its defense is actually quite large. As opposed to needing to hit this with something that does 5 or more damage to remove it from the board, you now only need to hit it with something that does 4 or more damage if you don't have direct removal. 4 is an important number in cards, as we will continue to see. 4 is one of those key breakpoints in attack value, where you see a lot of strong value play units, whether that be the newly returned 5th Rangers, a lot of the tanks, a lot of the heavy infantry are in that range, and that means that unless you've got a second Seahawk on the board or a way to buff this, this becomes answerable with trading, which is slower than some aggro decks would like it, but arguably we've had aggro be just a little bit too oppressive, like too generic. I think it is nice to see a meta where aggro is not the only thing that you play on ladder to go up, and I think Seahawk at the moment is still answering a couple of very important cards. Sabe Regiment, anything that pings, obviously it answers crossfire, which is incredibly prevalent at the moment. It lowers the value of a lot of the big board clears and AoEs to make you have to think more, but it's not unbeatable. And I think this makes it a lot more beatable. I actually think many people will not realise that this is as significant a change as it is until they start to see how much easier it is to trade this thing out or ping it with some damage. Anyway, that's just my thought, and of course, I will remind people that balance changes can always be scaled up. But in this case, I think it's actually a pretty decent way of starting to gently bring Seahawk down while still letting it do the job that it was clearly intended to do. Moving on, another US card that probably won't shock people to see on this list is the 4th Alabama. So, 4th Alabama is a standard US card, so you can indeed run 4 of them. And so 1 cost, 1 op cost, 1/3 Blitz Infantry. But the relevant part of it is that it has Show When Drawn, which means when you draw this card, it shows your opponent that you have it. In doing so, you also give all of your units +2 attack until the end of turn. Right. The change here is pretty light. It just takes it from, it literally changes the text to Show When Drawn, give your units +1 attack until the end of turn. Right. First, the 1939 summary. Ah yes, 4th Alabama, the happy face of high rolls. I actually love this as a choice of language, by the way. Whoever wrote this, good job. We've been seeing people lean a bit too heavily on the high variance Alabama gives in recent weeks, and feel this creates more frustration than fun. Brewster decks can and do perform very well without adding the Alabama high roll into the mix, so we're reducing the buff to give it +1 instead of +2. It might make Alabama end up as a neglected backwater, but so be it. Right, I personally really like this change, but a lot of people won't. I like this change because I want to see less high roll in the game, because I want this game to continue to be a game in which you can get paid back for learning the meta, learning how to trade well. At the moment, Alabama was seeing play in a very particular way, which was that you were abusing the life out of the buff using things like Night Patrol or the 175th Infantry to put it back on the top of your deck so that you would then spawn a big pile of Brewsters, which is the 2/2 fighter. Well, it's 2/2 when it's in the front line. Technically, it's a 1/2 fighter when it's in the support line, but most of the time you're getting it into the front line. And then your Alabama, of course, is giving you basically mini Blitzkrieg, and you can repeat it. And this was just a feels bad deck. And what I mean by a feels bad deck is that it's too frustrating to lose to be healthy for the game's uptake in the future. I've been quite vocal about the fact that decks like this risk losing new players who get frustrated with the fact that it's like, it doesn't matter how hard I work or how well I build my deck or what board I create, when my opponent can just get huge buff and rip my board apart with one card, or more specifically, 4 copies of a standard card, that they can repeatedly put back on top of their deck. And they're right, it's just not fun. I think there is a danger here that this might literally kill off Alabama as having any interest or value to anyone, although I will always say actually having 1/3 blitz infantry is not necessarily ever a bad thing, particularly if we start to see mid-range come back, which is arguably where this card seems to by design want to go, as opposed to just being used in aggro high roll. Personally, I am hugely in favour of this change, but I imagine some other people may just be incredibly sad because it takes away the ability to just rapidly run out games that you either win or lose in 2 to 3 turns. And be aware that a 1939 are going to be monitoring play rates and stuff like that, and if it's an issue, I'm sure it can get buffed again in the future. But for the moment, I am actually hugely pro this change. I think it's a very smart change, and I think it takes one of the most feels bad decks that we've had to deal with in a while and just says, do you know what? Not for a bit. Which is fine. Anyway, moving on, because I was a little bit on my soapbox there. Sabe Regiment. So this is another card that I've been known to have vocal opinions on. Sabe Regiment, for those who don't know, and I would imagine most do, is the 4-cost, 2-op cost Japan Special Infantry. It's 4/6, and it has once per turn, when you shuffle, distribute damage randomly to enemy equal to units in play. This card is insanely powerful. It's ludicrous. I have said this multiple times. I personally have not been a fan of the design of the card, and I've been very open about that. I personally don't like the design of the card text on anything short of an elite. Let's see what 1939's change to this is, and the change is to take the stats down to 3/5. Sabe, the most beautiful bow at the ball. Sabe, arguably, the buff card. The buff this card received back in August single-handedly put Juffle on the map. I said Juffle. You got me. It is keeping its powerful ability, but we're shaving up a couple of points to reduce its ecological footprint slightly. This by itself will not have a big impact on the favourability of the shuffle strategies, but there is more to come, so hold tight. Right, this is going to be the first time that I have quite strongly negative opinions about a change. I'm sorry, it's not enough. It's not enough, not because there isn't a way to make a change to this card and then make some other changes to the shuffle synergy to make the shuffle deck less high roll. There absolutely is. It's not enough because this card still has a package which fits perfectly into an already incredibly strong deck, which is Japan, Poland, Legions, or Jintel, depending on the way that you want to refer to it. Because you have Dug-In and Shifting Doctrine, there are lots of good shuffle procs, and this can be a continuous board clear. I don't like this change. I don't think this change is strong enough. I don't think this change is going to make this a less played card. I don't think it's going to make a less impactful card. I think we're still going to see that package fitted in wherever you can if you're running Japan main or ally, because it's just insane. And this thing still has 5 defense. It is actually no more removable, really, than it was previously. Really, you have to suppress or remove this the moment you see it, or basically you've lost the game, unless somehow this is dropping when there isn't a board. But every deck that runs this is putting enough units on the board on its own to make this good, so every unit you're putting on is just increasing its value. This is the big negative for me in this balance patch. I would very much like to have seen a text rework. I've been very open about this. I think this is a ludicrously strong ability that should be taken off this card and maybe added to some form of elite unit for Japan in the future. However, we'll see how the change plays out, but honestly, I don't find this that impactful. Other people disagree, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Anyway, moving on. Another Japan change. This is Kyoto Regiment. This is another card that some people have had some strong thoughts on, but probably not one people were expecting to see a change to. So Kyoto Regiment, for those who don't know, is the Japan 3 cost, 1 op cost, 2/4 Guard Infantry. As Intel 1, it is a limited card, so you can run 3 of them, and it says deployment, remove an enemy unit until this unit leaves the battlefield. So you put this down, you take any enemy unit off the board, and even if it comes back later, it loses all of its buffs, changes, everything onto that. This can be an incredibly powerful piece of pseudo removal, and it gives you guard, and it gives you intel. It has been changed, but the change is simply to drop its attack to 1. So, 1939 summary, this nerf is not aimed at a specific deck as such, but rather at a down-tuning of a card that was pushed a bit too hard. Removing an enemy unit's very strong, and when coupled with a solid body, this unit simply offered too much. This will impact a few decks, most notably Intel, but the card is still very much playable. Okay, so... okay, kind of, sort of, maybe, and then no. So the last part of this impacting Intel. No, it really doesn't. Intel did not care about the attack value of Kyoto Regiment. This card is still immensely playable Intel. This card is still a straight-up include in Intel, because dropping it to 1 attack doesn't really change that much. I mean, in some of the fiddly removal options and stuff like that, and trades, maybe, but ultimately it still has too much. And it doesn't have too much because of its stats. It has too much because it has removal, guard, and intel all on one body. Do I think this actually needs a strong change? I don't know. That's more debatable. We haven't seen Intel be super oppressive lately, so maybe it's going to be fine. I'm certainly not against the change, but honestly, if I was making the change, I would have just wanted to remove Intel from this card, because I don't think it needs it. But we'll see how it goes. This is still a good card. If you crafted this card or whatever and you're looking at the nerf pack, don't. Like, honestly, don't panic. Like, it goes down to 1 attack. Ultimately, this is a very meh change to me. It is a nerf, but not a significant one. Anyway, let's move on, because I think the next card is one that people will definitely have expected to see a change to, and that is the 110E Regiment Motrice, or Motrice, depending on which part of France you're from. I've been corrected by this a couple of times recently. For those who don't know, I was raised bilingual, but I was raised bilingual in a very particular way, and depending on where you're coming from, it gets a bit weird. But anyway, the 110 Motrice is a 2 cost, 1 op cost, 2/2 Blitz French infantry. It's a special card, and its text is give your units +1/+1 the first time you shuffle your deck each turn. This card single-handedly made shuffle a thing, because this card gave shuffle a super early way to generate incredible board presence. There is a change. The change is to the card text, so we'll skip to it, which is give your other units +1/+1 the first time you shuffle your deck each turn. If I just read that, and you're wondering what the change is, the key word here, of course, is other. This still does exactly the same thing, but it does not buff itself. Right, 1939 summary. Now we come to the second shuffle nerf. Shuffle went from 0 to 100 in seconds after the August patch, and in hindsight, we gave it a bit too much. This deck is still very interesting, so we do not want to nerf it into the ground. Now that this unit is no longer buffing itself, it means it will be easier to deal with even when all the stars align for the deck. Yep, 100% accurate. I'm fine with this change. I think this still allows the deck to exist and to do what it does, but it means that this... I honestly think this is a very strong hit, because as a 2/2, this thing is very, very targetable and very, very fragile. You will not see the Blitz become as relevant as it once was. Being able to push this forward as a 3/3 after it's blitzed itself is way more appealing than risking pushing a 2/2 forward, because 2 attack is super common in the game. So there's going to be a lot more having to hold this back and rely on it sticking around long enough to buff other units, which means that the shuffle deck is going to have to be slower by nature. I'm all for this change. I think this is pretty good. I think we have to see how it plays out. As I say, in combination with the Sabe change, that does impact the shuffle deck a bit more because Sabe's a tiny bit more, but honestly, I'm not going to go back to my Sabe rant. This is a good solid change. Right, moving on. Buff time. First buff is to a card people might not have expected. In fact, as usual, several of the buffs will be cards that people won't necessarily expect. This is Chain Home. So Chain Home was the British 3-cost order, limited order, so you can run 3 of them, and it said, change the attack of a friendly unit to be equal to its defense. It fights a random enemy unit. Problem is, this didn't see any play, because as appealing as it might sound, it just didn't work. They've changed it by simply making it a credit cheaper. Let's have a look at why. We've now entered the realm of buffs and beautification. The first couple of buffs are to the British fight scheme sub-theme from Naval Warfare. You'd be forgiven for not even realising that sub-theme had landed, because it landed with a whimper. Being cheaper, of course, means more efficient and easier to pull off. Unlikely to make it into a tier 1 strategy, but it certainly makes it more interesting to play around with. Kind of, yeah, but I still think this is sort of overpriced, and I don't think there's enough support yet. But if the winter expansion adds more synergy and advantage to this fight strategy, Chain Home will become a lot more appealing. But it needs more support before it's going to become actually good. I love, by the way, to see the change, but I don't think it's super good. There's not really a Britain deck that wants this right now. Right, rolling on, we get to HMS Formidable, and this is kind of in much the same vein. HMS Formidable is a 5-cost British special order, and it says, change the attack of a friendly unit to be equal to its defense. It fights all enemy units in a random order. This also landed with a whimper and saw no play. It has now been changed to 4-cost, so it's getting the same treatment. And literally, the text from 1939 is same goes for HMS Formidable as above, empowering an underutilized strategy. With the right setup, this can end up being a full board clear. Fact is, this is a Navy card, also opens up some possibilities to fit it into a British Navy control shell, though only time will tell if that Navy deck has legs to stand on. At the very least, some people will find enjoyment in experimenting with this. Whatever floats their boat is good with us. Definitely have a cook with this, but this might lean into some thoughts about what be coming in the winter. There's a subtext there that I'm not going to go into in too much detail, but these two changes, I think, are more likely to be signals of the future than they are relevant right now, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Fast Hinds. Okay, this is less likely to be a future impact. Right. Fast Hinds is the German elite order. 1 cost, and it says, give your German tanks in the front line +2/+1. The buff is 1 cost. Same cost. Give your German tanks +2/+1. Right, next we have a couple of buffs that are actually reverts of old nerfs, or at least partial ones. German Blitz has been dominant for a while, outrun and outvalued by other aggro decks. Dormant for a while, sorry, outrun and outvalued by other aggro decks. Removing the frontline restriction means the deck now has more comeback power, a very important factor with so many aggressive decks running around. No kidding. This is actually huge, because this can enable a lot of strength in Hinds decks. I know a lot of people, shout out Core Data, who are going to be cooking with this card hard in things like Jerfin Hinds, because this is actually a huge buff. It is very powerful. I'm really quite excited to play with it myself. and I love this change. I think it just enables a new, or rather an old strategy that had died out. I'm quite excited to see how this goes. Going to enable a new aggro deck for people who love aggro. Right, quick answer really, because it's just a good change. Moving on. The B-17 Flying Fortress. Right, if anyone is, you know, surprising or wants a good shot game, this is time to take a shot for unexpected change. I don't think anyone would necessarily have seen this coming. The B-17 Flying Fortress is the 9-cost, 3-op cost US Special Bomber. It is 5/5 with Heavy Armor 1 and has deployment, destroy a random enemy unit. This is getting reduced to 8 cost. It says here, the other old warhorse seeing a slight facelift is the Flying Fortress. Well, we're not going back to the 8-cost 6/6 version. Shaving a credit off its cost makes it slightly more relevant in coming down in time to impact the battlefield in a meaningful way. Big Bombers' dedicated strategy will need more love to become truly viable, but at the least, ramp decks now have a stronger option than before. Yeah. I mean, this is just a small but solid change for a particular archetype, whether that be ramp or big bomber decks. You can play around with this. Do I think it's amazing? No, but it does become a more appealing pick off develops. And it also, it's just a nice clean change, and I completely agree. Going back to the 8-cost 6/6 would be a bit too much. Do I think it's a huge change? Not really. I don't think it's going to change anything massively unless the new expansion changes things heavily, but it is nice. Right, Isolation. Isolation was the Japan Elite Order. 2-cost, remove target unit from the battlefield, return it at the start of your next turn. It's just being reduced to a 1-cost order that does exactly the same thing. And the summary is, having just stated above for the Kyoto Regiment how strong even a temporary removal of a card can be, we are aware, of course, immediately contradicting ourselves by strengthening this temp removal. Wouldn't be a proper 1939 patch otherwise. Alright, fair self-call out. Temporarily removing an enemy unit may not be all that fancy right now, but perhaps there's a future where this becomes more relevant? Who knows? Right, there's definitely some leaning, and I like it, into maybe light foreshadowing for the future winter expansion. And I kind of like this as a change. Isolation, I don't necessarily think is still going to see a ton of play, but reducing it by a credit certainly makes it marginally more appealing. But the fact that you can get a body that does this, that isn't an elite, and doesn't have to, like, return it, and yeah, there's a whole thing. Like, this is not an amazing card, so I don't know. Right. Le Division Leclerc. This is another card which you'd be forgiven for not expecting to see a change to. The Division Leclerc is a French limited infantry. It's a 4-cost, 2-op cost, 3/3 guard. And it says, gets +3/+3 the first time you shuffle your deck each turn. This obviously was meant to be part of the shuffle strategy, but honestly didn't see a lot of play because it's kind of big and lumbering and slow. And that's not the way the deck went. The deck went heavily aggro. So the change here is to reduce its cost to 3. And the summary is, so far the shuffle strategy is almost exclusively used in aggressive strategies. A slower, more controlling version is also a possibility, though has less support. While this cost reduction is unlikely to make a control shuffle deck a top-tier strategy, at least makes it a bit more viable. In an ideal world, we would see a wider variety of shuffle decks in the meta, and maybe one day that will happen. Once again, maybe one day in all of this stuff, we're seeing more foreshadowing. Interesting. Also, I kind of agree in that there is a heavier version of Shuffle, which, in a world where we lean less insane high roll and aggro versus just hard control, could be very good. We've seen recently more and more changes to tier 1 decks, particularly, that are starting to lean away from being too far at one end or other of the spectrum. We've started to see decks starting to lean back into a little bit more mid-range, a little bit more body on the board. And that being the case, I actually question whether this buff might end up being regretted for being a bit too strong. I don't know, but I'm not 100% sure Leclerc need to be buffed to be playable. We will see, but at 3 cost, this is actually really good if you're wanting to play a kind of more sustained mid-range strategy or lean control, but you shuffle somehow. I'm interested to see, 1, what the future holds that might support this, and 2, whether anyone cooks with this. But I think this might end up being more meaningful than people expect. But I might be proven wrong in the future. Right. Okie doke. This is an Italian change. This is the Semovente DA7518. This is a 3-cost, 3/3 heavy armor 1-op cost tank. It's a special, and it deals double damage against tanks. This card basically never saw any play. It remains identical, except in classic 1939 style, we're just going to slap Blitz on it. And in this case, I kind of love it. Which is unusual. We'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, the final buff this time around is to the Semovente DA7518. In the long run, we want to make Italy a more interesting ally for a combined arms strategy. A few pieces are still missing for that to become a really viable, but this is one step in that direction. No kidding. So, this is not nothing. A 3-cost, 1-op cost, 3/3 heavy armor blitzing tank is pretty good if you can buff it. Even more so, given that it deals double damage against tanks in a world where we have huge tank moments. Expect to see people start to gently simmer and cook with this, and then also keep your eyes open for whether this is yet more foreshadowing as to different things that 1939 want to push. I think it's quite nice to see them openly saying that they'd like to push Italy as a combined arms ally. That's actually quite interesting. I like the openness of it. Anyway, that brings us to the end. We just get the that's all for now. These changes will go out on October the 28th. As of time of recording, that's tomorrow. So get yourselves set, and they do so. You better hurry up and make the most of these changes before the winter expansion comes and flips everything on its head. Let us know your thoughts on these and other matters. Your feedback means a lot to us. See you on the battlefield, Commander. Right, let's have a quick summary. Back to my beaming face. Okay. Overall, how do I feel about the patch? Actually, pretty good. There are a couple of things I have issues with, and I stated them quite clearly. I don't think the Sabo Regiment change was particularly good or relevant, but I do think that we've seen a nice level of openness in the discussion of the reasons why. I'd like to see that grow and become more expansive. And I'm certainly going to do my best to continue to advocate for and bring communication about that. Stay tuned, you might find out more about that in the future. Because I think it's really cool to connect the community a bit more with the process and the understanding, so you kind of get a reason of some of the logic as to why certain things happen. The other thing I will say is that I do think this is a patch that is trying to tune down the overtuned, not tune anything too heavily up. And I'm personally pro that at the moment, because I think that would be very dangerous right now. There are a lot of quite strong decks out there, and I don't think we want to see them get tuned too far up. Now, I'm fully aware that people are going to have different points of view and different things that they would have liked to have seen / not seen, and I totally encourage you, please. It will help the algorithm, it will help me, I will do my best to reply when I can. Get down in the comments and give me your thoughts. What do you think about this? Good, bad, ugly, pointless. These are interesting changes one way or the other. That's it from me. I am a little bit more limited on time nowadays, so I'm recording this one quite rapidly. As I said at the top of this, if this is a little bit more rough and ready than my usual level of presented content, that's because I'm in the middle of an incredibly busy week and weekend. However, if you do like the content, please like, subscribe, and if you can support, it means the world to help me keep being able to do content like this. As ever, take care of yourselves, be good human beings, and I will catch all of you next time.